We are given the equation f of x equals x squared plus 10x plus 2, which is a quadratic equation. We want to use what's called the quadratic formula, which I have up here today, to be able to solve this quadratic equation. We also have a method that we can kind of test and see what kind of solutions it has, and I'll do that in another lesson, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you that we know on this particular example we have two real solutions. So the first step that we do when we're solving a quadratic equation using the quadratic formula is that we have to identify a, b, and c. And we get that from the standard form of ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is your leading coefficient, b is your second coefficient, and c is your constant term. So we pull those out of this. In this particular example, in front of the x squared I have no number, so therefore a is going to be 1. It's understood to be 1. When it's 1, we do not write it out. It's understood to be there. So a is equal to 1, b is equal to 10, and c is equal to 2. So that's the first step. We have to establish what a, b, and c are. The second step is we have to substitute into the equation. So we're going to do that. We're going to take a, b, and c, and we're going to substitute those right back into the quadratic formula. So the formula is x equals negative, in this case b is 10, so we substitute in 10 for b, plus or minus. We have plus or minus because we're going to have two solutions. A quadratic equation always has two solutions. And then we have the square root of b squared, and again b is 10, so we have 10 squared minus 4, which is part of the quadratic formula, times a, in this case a is 1, times c, which is 2, and then this whole thing is divided by 2 times our a, which is 1. So the first important step, or actually the second important step, is substituting everything in correctly. Our next step, once we've substituted in correctly, step 3, we want to simplify. So that means we want to reduce everything as much as possible. So we're going to have x equals a negative 10 plus or minus the square root, and then we take the 10 squared, 10 squared, 10 squared is 100. And then notice our sign here, we have a negative times two positives, so the result is going to be a negative. 4 times 1 times 2 is going to give me 8. And that's all divided by 2 times 1, which is 2. So that's the first step in simplifying. Then we're going to simplify a little more. So x is going to equal negative 10 plus or minus the square root. And then we do 100 minus 8, which is going to give us 92, all divided by 2. And then we continue to simplify. Now, if you'll notice, I have the square root of 92. 92 is not a normal number that I can actually take a square root of. So what I want to do is I want to try to break it down into factors that I might be able to find a square root. So notice it's divisible. It ends in 2, so that means it's divisible by 2. So I'm going to start there. I'm going to divide it by 2. So 2 will go into 92 to go 4, which is 8. Take the difference, 9 minus 8, that's 12. And then 2 will go into 12 6 times. So we got 2 times 46. And then we try to think of some factors of 46. Notice it also ends in an even number, so 46 is also divisible by 2. So 2 will go into 46, 2 will go into 4 2 times. 2 times 2 is 4. Bring down to 6, 3. So our factors for 92 are going to be 2 times 2 times 23. Now, I'll look at those. 23 is a prime number, so I can't factor it any further. But I have 2 times 2, which I can combine back to 4 times 23, which gives me 92. So 4 is a number I could take a square root of. So I'm going to substitute these factors back in underneath my radical. So x is going to equal negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 4 times 23, all divided by 2. But I'm not quite there yet. I'm almost there. My next step is I want to take care of this square root. So I can do that. So I have x equals negative 10 plus or minus. The square root of 4 is 2, and it comes outside the radical, so I have 2 onto the square root of 23, all divided by 2. Now, you're probably sitting there thinking, can I make that any simpler? And the answer is yes, you can. Remember I told you with the plus and minus, we have 2 answers. So we're going to split that into 2 answers. So we have x equals negative 10 plus 2 onto the square root of 23 divided by 2. And then we have x equals negative 10 minus 2 onto the square root of 23, all divided by 2. We're still not there. We need to simplify as much as possible. So notice on both these answers, this portion is divisible by 2, and that's divisible by 2. So I could divide 2 into 10. 2 goes into 2 one time. 2 goes into negative 10 5 times. And 2 goes into 2 one time. So that makes my answer here x equals negative 5 plus the square root of 23. So there's one solution. And then I have x equals 2 goes into 10 5 times. 2 goes into 2 one time. So I'm going to have x equals negative 5 minus the square root of 23. Now, I want to see what those are as a decimal. So I'm going to pull up my calculator. So I'm going to add a calculator page. And it was negative 5 plus the square root of 23. And that gives me approximately negative 0.204. So x is approximately negative 0.204. And then if I do the other one, I have negative 5 subtract the square root of 23. And that gives me a negative 9.79. Now, there's one other way that I can check this. I can actually check this by looking at the graph. And I have already graphed this. I kind of have it hidden to the side here. I'm going to drag the graph back out here so you can see it. So you can see what I'm telling you is true. And if you'll notice the values, and of course the calculator rounds it a little bit, but you can see that it checks out. Where it crosses the x-axis, that's the solutions.